Hey everyone, welcome to the Maker Mistaker podcast, where we love to have deep, eye-opening, and mind-bending discussions about life. This is episode 5, and today we're talking all about meditation. I'm your host, Jeff Finley, and with me is George Coghill. Say hey, George.
Hello.
So, good to have you on again. It's been a month. It's been through the holidays and New Year's Eve, and it's 2015, and so what have you been up to? I mean, any news tidbits, any cool things sticking out to you, George?
Well, I mean, I mentioned to you before we got recording, get started recording about that raptitude.com blog that I've been reading a lot about, and kind of ties into what we're talking about today with the meditation. His focus in a lot of his posts is on mindfulness, which is a form of meditation. So I guess it's not something I practice regularly, but I'm looking to do more of it myself, actually. But yeah. I don't know. I think that like I was telling you that his back catalog of blog posts has been taking up a good chunk of my reading time this past few weeks. So I'd say it can kind of sum up what I've been doing. So
cool. And the site is raptitude.com. So yeah, that's awesome. I'm going to check it out too. I think it really resonates with what we're going to talk about today with meditation and mindfulness and all that kind of stuff. But so for me, well, I want to tell you and the listeners, so I am officially on my own now as an independent entrepreneur, self-employed graphic designer, writer, blogger, podcaster, creative person. So I haven't actually figured out what I'm going to be doing, but I'm working on my book. So for those of you who don't know, I'm writing a book about my morning routine and how it changed my life and my experience with practicing my wake up early habit for over a year and a half, and how it's changed my life, how I've done to stick the habit, how I've done to get over procrastination and resistance, all those kind of things. And also I'm coaching people on a wake up early for 30 days challenge on coach.me. And so that's been a really interesting experience because I've been able to work with people directly on how they're handling a wake up early habit. And, I've been able to solve some of their problems and kind of understand what other people really struggle with. So I'm including all this kind of stuff in my book. So I should have my first draft of my book done by the end of January. So the book is called Wake Up, and you can check it out at makermistaker.com/wake up and sign up to get notified when it comes out. And another thing that I had going on a week or two ago was I was on another podcast. I was a guest on Pillow Talk, which is on gossipistmag.com. And they had me on talking about my out-of-body experiences and lucid dreams and stuff like that, which if you read Maker or Mistaker, you've probably seen some of those posts where I talk about like how crazy they were for me. And it was really interesting. So we got into, are they real? What are they? Are they just product of the brain and all this kind of stuff? I think we'll probably cover OBEs and lucid dreams and stuff like that in a future Maker Mistaker podcast episode. But for now, you can check that out at gossipistmag.com. And another important thing, so George and I both use this app called Lyft, and it's a habit change app. It's really awesome. Last podcast episode, we talked a lot about habits. And so Lyft, they actually changed their name to coach.me. And that was a huge deal because that's a big shift in their perspective of the app. I mean, some people who were using this app called Lyft to track their habits now all of a sudden have an app called coach.me. And they may be pretty jarring for someone who's not really interested in it. But the cool thing is I'm actually a coach in that app. And so I was, like I said, I'm coaching people how to wake up early. And I'm also coaching people on meditation, which is pretty cool, and journaling, and any of the habits that I was really good at, that I checked into a lot. I'm able to be a coach in that habit and help other people in the community privately through text-based chat coaching. So it's pretty cool. You can find me at my coaching page is at coach.me/Jeff_Finley. Okay. Got those out of the way, George. So let's get into it. Let's talk about meditation and what is meditation and why we feel it's important. And so just for me, my own experience, I've been meditating for about 2 years now. And how about you? How long have you been meditating?
Actually, at the end of this month will be about 2 years when I started being really consistent with it.
Oh, that's awesome. So what is meditation? Do you want to go ahead and handle or tackle a definition for us?
That's a tall order there, but
yeah, sum it up in just one line.
Well, I'll tell you what. I just I don't know. I can't remember if I sent you this, if I emailed this to you, but I stumbled across this article where somebody was referring, with the same deal, like what is meditation, and there was what they referred to was, and I'm going to get this wrong, I'm sure, but I believe it was a Himalayan sect, and in the original language for this group, this society, what they the word that they used, for meditation when translated was familiarization. And when I read that, I really thought that's exactly what this is. It's really becoming familiar with the patterns of your thoughts and how your mind works. And it's really, to me, that kind of did sum up the whole thing in one word to some degree. So
that's pretty good.
How would you take that as a definition?
That's a really interesting analogy. I never thought of it that way. Familiarization. That's good. The way I'd put it is more like, quiet contemplation, sitting in silence. Some might call it prayer. Like I think a lot of people who pray, that might be kind of in the same vein as meditation. That's a different take. There's so many different types of meditation. So you can't really define it by one particular thing, but the core of it is really sitting in silence or just being in silence without doing anything. And what you're doing is just, I guess the only thing you are doing is observing and watching your thoughts. And that's the minimalist thing to do. Like there's active meditations where you can, scan your body with like sensation, like what are you feeling from top to bottom, or you could try to do a mantra or a chant. There's guided meditations where you've actually got an instructor telling you, take some deep breaths, count your breaths and what is it? Bring your focus to the tip of your nostrils, and count the breaths going in and out. And, so they'll like guide you through it, but it can be done for relaxation, for stress release. Yeah. So what do you think, George, is like a common misconception about meditation? Like if you had a person who's never meditated before and you asked them what meditation was, what do you think they would say?
Well, I mean, I don't have to guess. I had all those misconceptions myself before I started. So
oh, really?
Actually, yeah, I mean, I don't even remember if I posted this or not, but I at least drafted a blog post all about this because I was like, after I was doing the meditation regularly, and then also, because I'm a geek about everything I get into, I was reading the hell out of it. But, I realized there was tons of misconceptions I had. Like first, you got to sit cross-legged or sit in some kind of a pose. Not true. You can sit in a chair if you want to. You don't even have to sit up straight if you don't really want to, even though it's recommended. But, the ideas that you're trying to clear your mind, which is totally ridiculous. You're not trying to do that at all. I mean, I started looking at like my preconceived notions of what meditation was. And I'm like, I think I got all my ideas from like cartoons and movies and TV shows and stuff like that were, that were also uninformed, because really a lot of the stuff is very, and like you said earlier, I think prayer, especially contemplative prayer, can be considered a meditation, but that's another thing that a lot of people think too, is that meditation is religious or has something to do with praying, and it really doesn't. I think you could more say prayer is like a meditation versus meditation being a prayer. I mean,
totally.
You don't have to be religious whatsoever. Like, because there's a lot of people who, or there's a lot of focus on meditation these days, and you see a lot of people, touting the health benefits on the scientific study side of things. And I'm sure there's people that are thinking, well, that's against my religion, or I'm an atheist or something. But meditation is it's not easy. It's just it's very basic practice. It's just a technique, basically. It's very much based on the body, which surprised me a lot. The more I do it, you have there's a lot of misconceptions that or at least I shouldn't say misconceptions, but there's a lot of associations with, the idea of spirituality. But really what you're doing, like you said, there's a lot of the stuff has to do with the body, whether it's paying attention to your walking and walking mindfully, or paying attention to the breath or whatever, sitting still. But a lot of it's more about the body than really anything else. But I think I covered the big ones. Sitting in crazy postures. Mm-hmm. That's a big misconception. Clearing the mind is a big misconception. You're not supposed to do that. If you try to do that, you will hurt yourself. So don't do it. What's the other one? And I guess, the whole religious aspect is a big misconception too. So
yeah, when I got into meditation, I thought, well, I guess I don't even want to say before I got into meditation, because I first heard of it and I associated it with like a new ager, like with a yoga outfit on, or a Buddhist monk, or, like putting their hands in some position and chanting like, Om or something like that. And, you, like you said, you would get these pictures from TV and movies and stuff like that. And I think most people, that's their intro to meditation. They kind of see someone meditating, but they don't know how it applies to their life. So at what point, George, did it come into your life as an actual viable option that you would thought you should do?
Well, I mean, that touches on some earlier episodes here, when it basically is one of the approaches I used to, from reading and some from research, but it was an approach to deal with some pretty bad depression I was going through at the time. And, the two things that they kept coming back to was exercise and meditation, like to do these two things. And I started out, like, when I said, it's been 2 years of regular practice, I was actually meditating for about, I would say, I don't know, let's just say 6 months before that, but it was very intermittent. I was using a different technique than I use now. And, I would do it when I thought I needed it, as opposed to doing it on a daily basis.
Right.
So everything kind of came to me, like I said, to try to work through these issues with depression. But as far as like something that I thought, like, this is something I want to continue to do or want to include in my life, like you were saying, that's a good question. I mean, it was from doing it. I guess I saw the benefits of it relatively quickly once I got past a lot of my, your anxieties to have like mystical experiences and stuff. Once you get past a little bit of that and, get into the technique itself and doing it for what it is, I started to see the benefits, and I was like, this is something. And it was also something that as a kid, I was always interested in I'm still interested in weird stuff, but as a kid, I was fascinated by all kinds of esoteric and, all kinds of stuff like that. And, I was always curious about yoga, because I would read about it in books and stuff. And I was always, as weird as this might sound, I was always self-conscious to even do it. I was like, I don't want people to know that I did something like that, or I didn't know if I'm disciplined to sit and, do it long enough to have any real experiences with it. But, so that was part of it too, is I was like, you know what, I'm getting old, and if I don't start now, when am I going to do it? So I wanted to kind of like, it was a perfect storm of situations to establish it as a regular practice. And I'm going to say the end of this month will be 2 years, and I have meditated every single day of those 2 years. I aim for twice a day if I can. And lately that's been pretty consistent too, but I didn't start out doing twice a day, but I've done it every day since I started, made that decision 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's really consistent. I mean, George, you are a machine when it comes to consistency and all that kind of stuff.
I'm like a robot sometimes, man.
Yeah, that's impressive. And so when I got into it, I actually got into yoga first. I had a friend of mine, an old high school friend, who emailed me in 2009, I think, and 2010, maybe somewhere around there. And she was looking for a flyer for her new yoga business. And I was like, oh, hey, wow, I haven't talked to you since elementary school. And then she's like, in exchange, like I can't afford it. So I was like, will you trade for some yoga classes? I've always wanted to try that. So I took some of her yoga classes, and she was really awesome, got me. And I was into breakdancing. So to me, yoga felt like breakdancing in slow motion.
Right.
Like all these different postures you can hold yourself into. So I was really excited about like trying to pull off cool moves, of course, that's like when you get into yoga for a long time, you realize that's not what it's about. But But like me, I was like, oh, what's the hardest move I can try to like push myself to do? And so I got into that. But we would at the end of the session in Shavasana pose, which is what she called corpse pose, where you're just laying flat on your back, and you would just sit there in silence. And it was at the end of a tough yoga session, so you're like exercised out, you're winded maybe a little bit and feeling sore. So at that point, it's super relaxing. And she would have amazing music playing, really soft kind of chanting or flute music or something like that with some incense burning, and it was really, really relaxing, and I just loved that energy. I took that class once a week for several months. I don't know how long it lasted, but I eventually, quit going. I think I got lazy or something happened, and then she ended up canceling her classes. So that was my first introduction to a yoga / meditation thing. She didn't call it meditation, but like they're related, right? So
I don't want to cut you off, but that's one thing I want to bring up later is for under misconceptions is like, the asanas versus the meditation in yoga, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good point. So that fast forward several years later, I always when I was going through my depression, I took naps in my car. So to me, it was really actually, it wasn't even a nap. I just wanted to go out in my car and be alone, like get away from the distraction, the social media, the responsibilities going on in the office, just other people. I wanted like a safe place, and the only place I could go was either the bathroom or my car. And like, I just had these really dominant urges pushing me to get out there to go to my car. So I just went out there and laid there and, put my seat down and just kind of chilled. And I didn't know what meditation was at that point. But then I think there was a time when I think I downloaded the Lyft app, in 2011, 2012. And then, they had a meditation habit on there. So I'm like, you can kind of go through all sorts of different habits on there. And I was like, oh, meditation sounds good. I'm going to do that. So I checked into that. When I would go out to my car, I'd check in on it. And I would sit there in silence and I would say, yeah, I spent 5 minutes in silence that day. And I didn't do it regularly, but I only did it occasionally when I thought I needed it, right? And then I found an app called Headspace. I don't remember where I found it, but I think it was recommended maybe by someone on the Lyft community or whatever. And it's a free app that you can download, and there's 10 different sessions of guided meditation. So I would put my headphones in and he would kind of guide me along and tell me about my thoughts and tell me to watch my thoughts kind of coming and going as if clouds in the sky or ripples in a pond. And he kind of compared your mind to a pond, and you want to get it still. And so at first there's all sorts of, and every single thought is like a ripple, and you got a lot of thoughts, and, you want to watch them go. You don't judge them. You don't interact with your thoughts. You just watch it go. And, at the end, maybe you'll get a smooth pond, basically, or a clear blue sky. And I really like that. It seemed really relaxing, and something about it resonated with me pretty remarkably. So I wanted to keep doing it. And that was my introduction to meditation. And I eventually I started reading books about it and, got into it. So.
Yeah, when I was, when I was starting out, I also used that Headspace app. And I think if anybody's out there that's curious about it, that I thought that was, the basic app is free, and they have some paid courses you can use later on. But the basic stuff that they offer for free is really superb introduction. I mean, they explain it in a good way. Like the cloud analogy is a great one. Think of the thoughts in your mind is you're not trying to push clouds away. You're just observing the clouds go. Sometimes they obscure the sun, sometimes they don't. And your job is just to watch them and not to get too fixated on them. That really, and that one, the other analogy they had was sitting on a park bench on a public corner and just watching cars go by. And I was like, and you're like, pretend the cars are your thoughts, and you're just watching cars go by. And I'm like, those two analogies really helped me kind of break through some of those misconceptions we were talking about earlier. So that was an introduction for me as well to meditation.
Yeah, and I think around that time, I picked up The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, and like I've said many times before, that book was a game changer for me. It really inspired the idea of building a wake up early habit. I think that's right around the time when I started doing it. I was like, I need to build a wake up early habit. If I can just get up early, then I'll have time to meditate. And I was kind of envisioning this amazing morning routine, this morning ritual, like getting up when the sun comes up and having some tea and and meditating and reading and having a really peaceful morning, because that's what I needed. That's what my body was craving at that time. So anything I read that kind of felt that way is what I gravitated towards. And so The Miracle Morning was a book that I picked up after searching for help on a morning routine, like how to wake up early, like that book came up. But in that Miracle Morning, he talked about building a series of habits, and one of them was silence. He didn't even call it meditation. He called it silence, which I actually appreciated, because as someone who is new to meditation, I didn't know, I had preconceived notions as well. So when he said silence, I'm like, that sounds like something I could do. Like, yeah, I just really want to sit in silence. Like, no one bothers me. And, you're not going to sleep. You're paying attention. So it's like active silence, you're just sitting there watching. So, and he was like, you just got to do 5 minutes a day. And I'm like, I can do 5 minutes, like you think when a lot of people talk about meditation, they're like meditating for an hour or something. It's not even, it doesn't have to be like that. You can just check in and sit for a minute if you want. I mean, you can meditate right now while listening to this podcast. You can meditate anytime, anywhere. So that was my, I guess, extra push into building it as a real habit, building it into my routine so I can do it on a daily basis. And man, I really started to see results. I mean, let's talk about what someone experiences when they start to notice results. What did you experience, George?
Well, and that's a good that's a good topic to bring up too, because there can be a lot, going back to the misconceptions. There can be a lot of at least I had a lot of expectations that I was loading up on top of the meditation sit. So it's like, and that's another interesting thing too. And I think you and I have talked about this before, is that people can have different experiences from these things, even if you do the same technique as somebody else. Some people are more sensitive to these things, and they have a more dramatic effect on other people. So I found that I'm an undersensitive meditator. So I have less, it's harder for me to like, it's taken me longer basically to get to some of these places that some people get to in 3 months. It took me over a year and a half. So as far as like what to expect, one of them is to expect like to put some time in. You may not, there's people that sit down and have dramatic experiences off the bat or within weeks.
Well, what's a dramatic experience for someone who's listening and they're like, what is he talking about?
I can't tell you, because I've never really had any, but I've read about them, and you see them in other blogs. I've seen my blog posts and some message boards that I participate in, where people talk about having, these deep, blissful, full, separation of the ego from the body, and all these kind of things. And I'm like, I'm not, and we've talked about this before on the podcast. Where I'm a direct experience guy, so it's like, I'm not going to read into an experience that I've had just because it was described a certain way to me. If I feel something, I'm going to, actually, that was in that Robert Monroe book, that Journeys Out of the Body, where he's like, some people will have a more poetic description of something. So it's hard to tell if people are having more profound experiences, or if they're just more poetic about, the experiences that they do have. But I mean, so it's hard to, that's what's one of the tricky things about meditation, is that it's so subjective. It's like you can't get more subjective than that. So it's hard to really know what someone else is experiencing. But from listening to a lot of I don't want to call them gurus, but meditation guys that are well known. I'm trying to think of some names off the top of my head, but I can't do it. But you read lectures from these guys, and they talk about I've been doing this for a long time, and it's some days are better than others. I mean, I'd say about 6 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, but I had some I don't know how deep we want to get into some of these conversations for the intro of meditation, but I had some pretty profound, and I don't know how to explain the experiences to someone who doesn't meditate, but and I never thought that I'd be the person that would say, use the words like inner energy or whatever, but there's no other word for it, and there's some words that some of these systems will, label these things. And I don't really do that, because I don't have a name for it. I'm just like, it's a physical sensation. And that's all I can really say that it is, but it's unmistakable. It's not like I'm reading into these experiences, but I can't really describe how they work. It's a weird thing, and it was actually kind of disorienting the first time it happened. I was like, "What is going on?" But it was also a nice confirmation that something was happening. But I mean, I would say that if you're just starting out in meditation, the trickiest thing is really to sit still long enough. I mean, it's more about your body to start out with than your mind. It's more about sitting still and being able to not fidget and not not get distracted by the body, itches and things you want to scratch and stuff. And I think for a lot of people, that might be the most dramatic first experiences when they finally, most people don't sit quietly. You and I are introverts, so we are used to being alone, recharging your batteries on your own. I mean, we're used to having some, a lot of people I know, especially my extroverted friends, they're not by themselves a lot. They get anxious when they're not around other people and have stimulation. So a lot of people, that could be the most dramatic experiences, is to really see how insane your thought processes really are, I shouldn't say insane, let's just say how runaway they are, how active they are, and how little you have control over it. So
yeah, that reminds me of I asked one of my coworkers a year ago about meditation, and she's an extrovert, definitely. She explained, she's like, "Oh, I don't like to meditate." And I was like, "Really? Why?" And she's like, "Oh, because, bad stuff likes to come up and I don't want to deal with it. I don't like to hear my thoughts or see what I'm, So I think meditation can be scary for some people because, if they're just sitting there, like, they'll start to have a lot of thoughts that come up, and then they repeat and they keep coming back, and you don't want to try to react to them, but then they keep coming back. And then a lot of them are negative talk, negative self-talk, things about like, am I doing this right? Oh yeah, that's another thing that every first time meditator is going to experience. Am I doing this correctly? Am I doing it right? Oh, I have an itch. Should I scratch it? What do I do? My back hurts. All these little things, all those little things come up. But that's just like the basics. But then once you get past that stuff, you might be having thoughts about like that thing you're really worried about that's on your mind keeps creeping back in, and it starts to, that thought form will build upon itself. It'll snowball into something else. Like you'll have a trailing thought after that. You'll get sucked into a spiral. And if you think a lot of negative thoughts, there's a chance that you can get sucked into a negative thought spiral where, things just getting worse and worse. And you're like, I got to stop meditating. I can't look into my mind like this. This isn't right. I'm going to be done. I'm afraid to meditate. I'm going to go out and do something active,
Well, I mean, and that's all that stuff is 1,000% true. I mean, that's what I think is, the power of meditation, is that a lot of times our society and the way we live our lives, most people, is designed to kind of distract yourself from what is actually going on up there. And your friend who said that, it's a very telling statement to say, I don't want to know. It's funny to me because that's like the opposite of the way I've always thought, is like, I want to dig deeper. And she's like, I don't want to know what's going on in there. And I'm like, how could you, like, you're stuck in there. Why don't you want to know how to sort all that stuff out? But I think it's very insightful that what she said, and she knew herself well enough to know that that might freak people out. And I read an article recently that, they warn people about that. If you're not used to looking within, I think you and I are both introspective people, but, by nature before we got into meditation. So kind of,
yeah, totally.
Yeah. So it kind of, we align with it a little quicker, but if you're not, and speaking of that negative spiral of self-talk, that was one of the reasons I got into meditation. Why I was really serious about it at the beginning was a book I read, and I can't remember the author, but the book was called The Mindful Way Through Depression. And it was, if you deal with depression, that book was really, really good. It was one of the best books I read, and he actually had some other stuff besides meditation there. But
wow,
he talked about, omega-3 and getting a full spectrum lamp and some other things that I benefited from. But it was a really helpful book to kind of sort through. His idea was focused on rumination, and rumination being where you're thinking over, like you said before, you're thinking over and over and over about these thoughts, and they could be negative thoughts. And a lot of times we do have negative self-talk. We have that inner judge. We have that inner critic, and it's just on it's on repeat autopilot. That's just constantly going, and that's why the mindful Way Through Depression book, he recommended meditation because he's like, this gives you an ability to watch these patterns and when you see them going into these spirals, to be able to step aside or to avoid them. And that's really what, when I read that, I was like, that's what I need, man. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm getting sucked into these whirlpools of negative, thought, like what you call them, thought forms.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I mean, and that can be, that's a great thing that you brought up, because that might be something that if you haven't looked within before, you could indeed find some things in there that you could go, wow, this is, it's like there's some crazy stuff going on there. So, for guys like us who are a little more, partial to that kind of process, probably even, I would say we were probably doing similar things to meditation before we even formally did anything.
Yeah.
But if you're not used to that, it can be a little disconcerting. But
yeah, I think you have to approach it in a way that, well, the good thing about meditation is you don't have to do anything about those thoughts. You just have to notice them. So like the whole point is to not react to the thoughts. But so if you're going to see them, if you're going to see thoughts that you don't like, or emotions might creep up, I mean, you can get into a deep state where some real subconscious stuff might creep up. But I think for most beginners, they're not even going to get that far. They're still going to be stuck on the day-to-day to-do list, things that they remember someone said that was really bothering them and all this kind of stuff. They're going to keep returning to them. But that's important to know. I think so you have to approach meditation not just from doing it, but I think you should learn about how to deal with what comes up in meditation. So one of the things that really helped me was the Sean Webb I Am Spirituality podcast.
Mm-hmm.
He really blew the doors wide open for me in terms of what meditation can do for you, because so I wasn't into spirituality at all. I actually had a negative bias towards religion and spiritual. Like I just thought I was kind of an agnostic atheist or whatever at that point. I was like, prove it to me, whatever, like, stop preaching to me kind of thing. So, but when I first read a book by Sean Webb called How Emotions Work in Humans and Computers, I was listening to the Smart Passive Income. So you can see where I was at this point. I was an entrepreneur. I'm listening to a podcast about earning a passive income, and he was interviewing Sean Webb about emotions. And he talked a lot about how we are not our emotions and we are not our thoughts. And this was before I was into meditation, but this is how I got introduced to Sean Webb. And so he had a whole equation that he had developed called the equation of emotion. And you've got your sense of self in the center of this whole world. And then you've got your thoughts swimming around it. And then you've got your attachments, basically, is what it is. So it's about ego and attachment. And I don't want to get into that. That's pretty deep stuff. But he helped me understand that I am not my thoughts. And there's a separation there. And then when I started meditating, you actually put your perspective in this as the observer, and you can watch a thought form and then go away, and then form and then go away and come back. And then you can see, and then all of a sudden you forget that you were even meditating, and you're like, oh my gosh, I've been thinking about something for like the past 2 minutes. I totally forgot. I got to go back to my breath. And, and so then you start to see how you can get trapped in them. But then then that realization there, that's when you snap into a different state of consciousness. And so you start to become the observer. And so through Sean Webb, I started listening to his podcast, which was called I Am Spirituality. And I was like, I don't want to listen to this. It's spiritual. But I listened to his full length version of his Body, Mind, Spirit 101, first few episodes of his podcast. Definitely go listen to those. The Body, Mind, Spirit 101 on IamSpirituality.com. He explains it in a way that's a lot more appealing to people who have more scientific brains, who have a lot more, they're not into spirituality, so they're into more practical, everyday stuff. So we broke it down in a way that I was really able to understand. And he would talk about books, and he recommended Eckhart Tolle. And as he always talked about Eckhart Tolle and a bunch of other authors, so I was adding stuff to my wish list, all the time, all these books. I'm like, oh my God, I want to read this one. And I want to read this one. And then right around that same time, a friend of mine lent me The Power of Now. And that one also, it just made meditation so much more meaningful to me. Through that, knowing that I'm not my thoughts, what the power of now, the present moment, all this kind of stuff started building for me. So my meditation habit took on a life a practice of its own that was more meaningful, and I started to get what I was doing, so that was a breakthrough.
Well, it's a good point to bring up the, like you said, without getting too deep into the "you are not your thoughts" concept, but taking a step back from that, we talked earlier about how it might be a little scary to see how your mind's off the rails with how much all the thinking that's going on that you're not in control of. But on the opposite side of that, I'd like to kind of balance that with a positive experience that I had, which really told me this happened last fall. So I'm not saying that there's any time frame that you got to meditate for 1.3 years before for this to happen, but mm-hmm. I caught myself one day in a situation where I sensed I had some anxiety, and there's no real reason to get into the specifics, but I was having some anxiety about some self-esteem issues. I was put myself out there and took a risk, and the results weren't as I had anticipated them. So I could feel the anxiety coming up, where you're kind of you have that thought process in your brain starting to go like, oh, why'd you do that? You shouldn't have done it. You should have just played it safe. Shouldn't have, whatever. But then I realized, when those thoughts started taking place, I could sense that my body was starting to literally kick into. It was almost like I could feel the chemicals starting to be released in order to have anxiety, like the adrenaline and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And it occurred to me in the middle of that whole process, speaking of the observer, is I was that's what I did. I was observing that whole process happen. And I'm like, wait a minute, I don't have to let this happen. I don't have to let these thoughts continue. And I don't have to let this anxiety and these emotions take over. I can just choose to not have those things happen. And I just stopped them. And I was like, holy shit, you can do that, and I didn't, that was the big breakthrough for me. I would have to say, where I was like, that's the benefit of meditation, is going back to that initial definition of familiarization, where I was familiar with how these, and I don't know if my brain is any less hectic up there, or my mind is any less hectic in the thoughts that are going through there. It's better, but it still gets pretty crazy at times. But I'm able to see the patterns and see how it works. And then when something comes up that I don't want to have happen, like I said, this anxiety was coming up, and being able to observe it objectively and go, hey, wait a minute, I don't have to identify with that, with that whole cascading thing that's about to happen. I can just stop it and go, nope, we're not going to do that. And I was like, that was a huge thing for me. And I think, that's when people say they don't, like, I don't want to know I don't want to know what I'm thinking, but it's like, when you know what you're thinking and you know how you think, then you can, it's like a little kid who does, is trying to pull a fast one on their parents. It's like, you can see it a mile away. They're not old enough to be good at lying yet. And it's like, when you pay attention to your thought processes, you can see these things coming up way before they have a chance to carry you away, and get you into a state of depression or a state of anxiety or anger or whatever. And I think that's where the power is. I don't know if you're necessarily going to avoid the emotions, but what you're doing is you're seeing them come at you from, you have the perspective of 1,000 miles. So it's like, you're not sideswiped by these things anymore. And if that was what your experience was in the past, I think that's where anybody could benefit from this stuff, is just being more, it's like, the park that I hike in regularly, I know that place like the back of my hand now, but when I first started hiking there, I didn't know where I was going. I don't get lost in the on the trails and stuff. Now it's like, I know that better than I know my neighborhood to some degree. Mm-hmm. And, it's the same with the meditation. I feel like what you're doing is you're really getting to know the territory, so that when something does happen, you're like, nope, here comes that again. And that's going to go to this, and that's going to lead here. And that's all hidden. Being able to have that perspective is super, super handy. You know what I mean? So
yeah, that power, that light of consciousness, that awareness. Think of it like a spotlight, and then you can say, so if I told you, focus on your stomach area, it feels like you've just put your attention there. Now bring it to your head. it feels like, you know what I'm talking about, like intuitively, that you can now observe what's going on in your head and now your foot, So what that's like is like a spotlight, and and a lot of times you can imagine the spotlight shrinking or growing big, like you're focusing it like a laser pointer or maybe you're expanding it so it's really, really bright and it's really wide. So that's like, think of that as an analogy. And there's different states of consciousness that we might have where our focus is like a laser. Maybe it is on a task and there's like a whole coffee shop full of chit chat going on behind us, but yet we're like rocking and rolling on a thing that we're really into. And that is like a laser pointed consciousness. There's like hard to infiltrate that. But you're really focused and tightly. You don't even know what's going on around you. So it's like, but then when you expand the consciousness, the awareness, if you can, then you start to get a big picture of like what is, like you can start to hear conversations going on in the coffee shop and everything like that. But okay, so that is sort of the analogy that your awareness is like a spotlight. So, and your thought patterns, imagine them like little criminals running around in a dark alley, and they're just like up to no good. And if you don't pay attention to them, they're just going to do their shit and, like run off with some valuable thing, and they're just going to do what they want. But when you shine the spotlight on them, it's like they're caught like deer in the headlights and they stop. It's like just by looking at it, it like doesn't do anything. Imagine like sit there and do this like exercise as you're listening. Like, what's my next thought going to be? And sit there and wait for it. And you're waiting for it. And it might take a few seconds before a thought actually comes in. You know what I mean? And that brief moment that you have there is that moment of inner peace or whatever, that moment of no thought that a lot of people talk about. And so you experience this clearing of the mind just for a split second. So that's a real simple exercise that you can do to experience what it is to have that space where there is no thought. Now imagine having no thought for like an hour. Like that is incredible. That's not going to happen. Okay. You're going to get a thought, but that spotlight of awareness, like George, you said, when you are experiencing a trigger or something that's causing you to have anxiety, the more you practice this meditation, the more you're like going to snap into an awareness where the spotlight's going to shine on that thought or that emotion immediately. And then you actually were able to witness like the feeling of like cortisol coming into your body to the stress hormone, like kind of just filling you up with adrenaline. Like you're able to experience it from when it started. And then you can, when you have that space of awareness, you can then say, I have a choice. What do I want to do? Do I want to go into that thought and continue to ruminate? Maybe it's going to lead me to a downward spiral, or I actually have free will. I can choose to not believe that thought and do something completely different. And that's an advanced stage where you start to, once you get familiar with your thoughts and your patterns, you can start to change them and choose different ones and realize that you do have power to literally choose a new thought and then make that new thought the habit. Because a lot of these repetitive negative thoughts are simply just habits that we've never even paid attention to. They've kind of run our life since childhood. And it's important that we start to pay attention to those things. And yeah, so I love the spotlight idea, like shining the light of awareness. And you do that with anything, whether it's an emotion in your body or a thought. So you can meditate on your thoughts and meditate on your emotions. I think getting to know both of those is equally beneficial.
Yeah, no, that's some good information. The spotlight example is pretty accurate too. I mean, that's what you're doing is you're paying attention to those little criminals, man. They're not criminals. They're little troublemakers, man.
I picture them like little trolls, like just with
right,
a fucking
gremlins,
bad attitude, like a little gremlin. They're just like, they know that they're doing something wrong, but you're not paying attention, so they can get away with it.
Well, yeah, we could. I don't want to go off on too many different topics because we're trying to keep it a little bit more towards the intro side of things. So I'm gonna stop my thought process there. But
well, can I share something with like to kind of? I'm going to bring it up a little bit. I'll bring it up a level a little bit. So when Sean Webb go ahead.
Before you do that, there was one thing that I wanted to. Before we go too far down into, the theoretical side of it, maybe we could talk a little bit more about the practical side of it, the technique side of like,
yeah.
What you do specifically, how often you do it, like where, when, how, you sit, what you do when you sit, and stuff like that. Because I mean, some of these things I think can be. I know I'm actually, I have this never-ending blog post I'm working on a draft of about like kind of like what I would tell someone, because I bring this stuff up to people a lot. I'm like, what's my 2-minute pitch that I can sell somebody with this on? And a lot of people have the same questions of like, well, what do I got to get special clothes or sit in this? And I'm like, no, you don't got to. You can. I've meditated on the airplane next to people, and I've had some of the best meditations ever in like super crowded, noisy places. So it's like. There's a lot of these things where I think people might think, oh, I need to have incense burning and, I got to have a special room in my house. It's like, you really don't. So it's like, maybe you could talk about like I said, what you do, when you do it, how, where, and why, and all that kind of stuff.
So like I said, when I first started, I went to my car and turned on the Headspace app and just like let him guide me into knowing what to do. And then when I felt comfortable, I would try to do it without a guide, just doing it to myself, like being my own guide, basically. And when I did the 5 minutes of silence in my morning routine, I did it on a chair, just like my dining room chair. I just kind of sat in it because I had a back, and I would put my hands on my knees, feet flat on the floor, back straight, close my eyes, put my focus on my nostrils area, and kind of felt my breath going in and out. And then I had to maintain my attention on my breath. First I started a timer on my phone so I would know when 5 minutes is up. And then so I would pay attention to the breath coming in and out. And then anytime I felt like I got distracted from my breath, I forgot that what I was doing, I would just take note of it and then go back to my breath and then see if I can last for 5 minutes. And then timer would go off and I'd be like, oh, I just meditated for 5 minutes. Cool. And I would check it off my list. Didn't have to worry about it for the rest of the day. And then I would do it tomorrow, same time tomorrow, so that's as easy as it can possibly be. Basically, you can do it anywhere. Like you said, you did it on a plane. Close your eyes, start observing your thoughts, start observing your body and what's going on around you. So without judging or falling into it. What about you?
Well, before we hop on me, is that what you do now? What's your regular practice these days?
So I went and bought myself a meditation cushion. Because I wanted to sit without a back, without a chair, basically. I wanted to sit Indian style or cross-legged. And I've done laying down meditations too. And I noticed, though, when I do laying down meditations, I'll have a tendency sometimes to fall asleep. That's the other thing you got to be careful of. If, you could fall asleep if you're meditating, if you're too comfortable. So you kind of want to put yourself in a position that's not that comfortable. But what I do now is I'll meditate wherever I feel like it. I mean, in the mornings, I usually have two places. Well, in my house, I usually have two places, and that's in the basement where my meditation cushion is. It's a special thing I bought on Amazon. It's like a, I don't know, it was kind of expensive. Just look up meditation cushion. It's like a combination of like a cat or dog mat, if you can picture that, like a little dog bed with like a round cushion that's like pretty sturdy that you can sit on, and it doesn't kind of squish down too far. It's not like a pillow. It's like a sturdy cushion. So when you sit on it, and you can kind of put your legs down Indian style, and it doesn't cut off all your circulation. So if you can't sit Indian style or cross-legged, like a lot of you might have seen yoga meditation masters do, you don't even have to do that. You can just sit with your hands on your knees or whatever in a chair. So, but that's what I do now. And that's my ideal spot. That's where I've got incense. If I want to burn it, I can do that. I don't have a shrine. I don't have any statues of Buddha sitting up or anything like that. That's just sitting in my basement. But I would like it if it was in a warmer room in my house. But I don't have a place, because the annoying thing is I can't go somewhere where a cat's not going to go. Cats will always get on me. They like to mess you up when you're meditating. The other place I like to do it is in our spare bedroom. I've got a bed there, and I'll either sit on it, and it's a good height, where my where my knees aren't too bent, if you know what I mean. Yeah, that's the other spot that I do it. I can't do it on the couch. It's just not the right height, and there's too many distractions in there. The clock is ticking and all that crap. Like a wall clock is ticking away.
Right.
So yeah, that's my two places.
And you still do a breath focus, and what's your durations?
Oh yeah, good question, George. You asked a lot of good questions. So I sometimes alternate between mindfulness meditation, which is basically the observer, the whole detachment of your thoughts. That's mindfulness meditation, also known as Vipassana, if you want to get fancy. But I'll do that, but then I'll also do meditations that are more in a spiritual nature, more of like I'm connecting deep with myself. Like I'll talk to myself. I'll love myself. I'll I'll try to play with energy. I'll try to like feel energy in different parts of my body and see. And then when I say, if I focus on my heart area, like I just kind of try to picture that my eyes are inside my chest, like where my heart is. I'll notice like a physical sensation start to happen around that area. And I start to notice that wherever I place my awareness, after a few moments, a physical sensation starts to occur. And it's almost like your attention activates it. Like it's like it knows that you're looking at it. It's really weird. So I would start to play with that and feel what it's like, the different sensations of blood or energy going through my bodies, my hands tingling. I would do guided meditations on different states of emotion. So like I would be, say if I'm doing a gratitude meditation, I would visualize or picture or remember moments where I felt really thankful for something. And then I would feel the gratitude. So it's not just a thought of like, yeah, I'm thankful, but I would feel the gratitude. And then I would kind of try to like feel what that really feels like and remember that feeling. So it's like when you can kind of get good at remembering that feeling of gratitude, then you can kind of access it quicker. Like you could build up a muscle memory. It's like playing a guitar, like, which is something I'm learning right now. You know, once you know where the chords are, you practice it for a while, your muscles know where to go. So you could do the same thing with emotional states. And so,
and relaxation states.
And too. Relaxation states, absolutely. So it's like, you know, the difference between when your body's agitated and when it's relaxed, and then maybe when it's really tired. And there's a difference between that, you know, the subtle difference between what's relaxed and content versus tired and exhausted, or subtle differences between what gratitude feels like and what joy feels like, or what creative accomplishment feels like. And so those are all sorts of different experiments I'll do, and I'll get in that emotion and I'll sit with that emotion and really spend some time in it. And then it starts to kind of go through my whole body. I'll feel it, different areas. It's like, whoa, it's getting bigger. I'm like, then I start to feel like I want to cry. And I've had a couple meditations where I've actually cried before, and I would have these moments of bliss, and it's incredible stuff. And it's like, wow, this is all happening with just being here, and it has nothing to do with thoughts, or you don't even have to have any sort of spiritual meaning behind it. But this is all sort of stuff that you can experience. So that's different than mindfulness meditation, which is what most beginners start with.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and then just on a side note there, that your comment about being aware of muscle memory and building up that familiarization, that's a huge insight that I had recently, where I'm like, yeah, what you're doing here is you're learning how it feels to be relaxed, so that, you know, like it's easier to get into that state once you're like, you can recognize the symptoms. So like, way easier for me to like get into the meditation state of mind and body when I sit down now, because I'm like, nope, I can feel it. I know how it feels. I can get into that a lot quicker. It's really, it's the whole riding the bike analogy. Once you feel the balance, then you know what you're aiming for now, you know, and it's a lot easier to get back there the second time and the third time. And, you know, it is like practicing guitar. It's the same. You're practicing your scales, man. You're learning to get to limber up that left hand. So
I never thought of it that way until, that never, ever crossed my mind until just past month or so. I went to a group meditation at this place called The Light Within in Lakewood. I only been there one time, but it was a meditation on surrender. So you would set intentions for the new year, and then you would surrender them to the universe or to your higher self or whatever it is. So it definitely has a spiritual bent to it. But what it is letting go of the attachment to outcomes. And so what does it feel like to let something go and surrender, and then feel safe knowing that you don't have to be in control? That's a state of being. And so like you can feel what that feels like in that state of being. Once you get comfortable in that state of being, you can start to live your life like that. And it's a really sort of content space. So it reduces a lot of stress when you feel like you can let go. You don't have to control everything. And things start to, you'll start to see things fall into place that might feel like luck or, coincidence or something like that. And then you start to trust the surrendering process. But I haven't got into that. That's a new thing for me. But it helped me become aware when the teacher said, the muscle memory. And I'm like, oh, yes. And it's like cellular memory too, where your body just knows what being in a good state of relaxation feels like. So you can easily just access it. So that's an awesome little aha moment that I had. And it's good that you had it too, George.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That we definitely had a parallel experience there. Now, what kind of duration do you do for these things? Is it very similar, or are they different depending on the meditation that you do? Or
Yeah, I do like 10 minutes a day. That's my basic. I used to do longer, 20 minutes, but sometimes it's really hard for me to sit there without feeling some sort of back pain or something like that. And with a 20-minute meditation, I know with practice it'd get better, but 10 minutes is my norm. And if I'm really feeling rushed, I'll just do 5 minutes, but most of the time it's 10.
Well, and that's a good point to bring up too, in case we don't touch back on this, is it's more important to meditate regularly. And if you can every day, like if you can only do 1 minute, do 1 minute, but it's
Absolutely.
better. Think of it like, I had a good analogy the other day. I was thinking it's like flossing. You can't floss for the whole week on Sunday. You know what I mean? You can't catch up on your flossing. You have to, the only way flossing works is if you do it, when you brush your teeth in the morning and you brush your teeth at night. So it's the same with the meditation. You have to do it every day, and it's better to do 1 minute or 5 minutes than it is to do 0. So it's in stacking them up in 1 day a week is far less ideal, because what you're trying to do is, like you said, you're trying to build a muscle memory. It's a rehearsal. It's not, you're not trying to cram. So
yeah, I want to ask you, George, what the best benefit that you've seen. The best benefit that I feel like I've seen is I've been able to be mindful almost 24/7 now. I mean, sure, I'm not completely mindful while I'm sleeping. That's the perpetual state of awakeness, that like an enlightened master might get into. But I feel like I'm mindful way more than I'm not mindful. And
right.
Meditation has helped me. So it's almost like I can spot patterns before they start. I know when something's going to happen. I can see my emotions a mile away, right as they're starting. And it's awesome to witness it when you have more like extreme emotions like anger. So if something really pisses you off, like just take driving in traffic, for example. Right. If some guy cuts you off, you may have reacted in the past and done whatever you do. You may have yelled, or maybe if you're more passive, you might have felt intimidated and kind of scaled yourself back and felt mad, but you didn't let it out. But with the mindfulness practice, with meditation, it helps you know what to do at all times, even when you're not meditating. It's like you feel the anger trigger kind of coming in, and you're just like, and then you can notice it, and then you start watching it, you start feeling it. You don't have to react. You can just watch it, and you see, oh, this is what anger feels like. Ah, okay, I see it. And then actually reduces the amount of pain that it feels, because that's a whole other thing. Like emotions feel painful. They feel bad, like bad emotions do. Good emotions feel great, right? But then the problem that people have is they add thought-based judgment to their emotions, which causes suffering. And that's the whole deal behind Buddhism and stuff, is the elimination of suffering. And the whole reason why people meditate a lot is to detach their thoughts from their state of being, so they can feel the emotion without any judgment on it. So they can feel anger and not really have any suffering associated with being mad. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I totally do, and it's a good word of judgment, because that brings me up to the biggest benefit that I've seen, and this was an awesome moment I had leaving the grocery store, because I'm sure I am not alone, because you read this in every single book about this kind of stuff, but particularly for meditation. But I have you have the constant that inner critic. It's like I refer to him as my asshole friend on the inside, because it's like this guy who just has to judge everything, judging how someone else looks and judging what someone else is listening to or saying or thinking or doing. All this constantly going on. And, and speaking of the Sean Webb podcast, like he opened my eyes up to realize, like, oh wait, that's just my ego trying to defend itself from feeling, like it's has less by putting other people down. So it's an interesting thing to do, but that's a little bit off the subject here. But the experience I had in the grocery store was, that inner that little judgmental voice was going on. And I actually had the thought, like, would you just shut up? And it was like, I realized that I wasn't identifying with that inner judgmental voice anymore. I was I was now able to go, that's not me. I don't know if I could have grasped it back when I first started meditating, but now that I've been immersing myself in this stuff, it was very obvious when it happened. But I was like, yeah, but it was a very liberating feeling where I'm like, oh, I don't have to identify with that condescending, criticizing, judgmental voice in my head. That is part of my mind, and those are thoughts that are going on. But I don't have to. Those aren't necessarily me, and I can stand aside. Like I said, that's just my friend who's a big jerk and can't keep his mouth shut, saying all that stuff all the time. And the less you pay attention to that voice, the less it pipes up. So that's been a huge. I don't know if I could say that I've had. The same experience as you with the 24/7 mindfulness. It's definitely improved my mindfulness.
Yeah, I can't say it's 24/7 even close. I mean, there's times where I'm definitely being pulled into a thought form, but what usually happens is like a hindsight mindfulness, like afterward, and it's like, oh, I see what was going on. You know what I mean? And then I guess the better you get at it, the more the space between when you recognize what's going on or you become aware by the time you reacted shrinks, and to the point where you're basically just on it all the time without even thinking about it.
Right, that's great. I love the hindsight mindfulness. That's awesome. But yeah, I mean, the disidentification with the chattering of the mind has been a big one for me, like I said earlier. But yeah, so that's interesting, man. It just cracks me up because even from our first conversation about all this stuff, like you and I are definitely the yin yang of experiences, because I'm like the opposite of you from my practice. I have.
It's cool. I feel like I know myself. I've got a more emotional energy, a more feminine energy. That if you get into the divine masculine, divine feminine energies, what those are. Feminine energy is a lot more in tune with emotion and, that kind of stuff. And then the masculine energy is a lot more focused on action and doing, you know what I mean? And so yeah. I think that's a great balance. The yin yang is a perfect example, perfect metaphor for the dynamic.
It's just funny how as you were talking, I was just cracking up because I'm like, because you're like, yeah, I tried this, I'm doing that, and I'm going for these. And I'm like, man, I am like a drill sergeant with my practice. It's like, very regimented, very, I stick with the same thing. Cause like my whole thing is like, again, going back to my scientist approach, but it's like, I wanted to stick with very particular techniques because I wanted to analyze them and see how they work. And I was like, it's no different than like an elimination diet. So, which I also did that too, to figure out why I was having some food issues. But, to me, this is like, the same kind of thing, but for the brain. I wanted to know, okay, if I change this, I have to keep it consistent so I can change things and see how my experience of it changes. So I started out with the Headspace app, and I did the attention of the breath at the nostrils, as it exited the nostrils, which is a great first meditation for anybody to do. You could do that forever. You don't have to ever change it. That could be your meditation for the rest of your life, but yeah. I started out with that, and I did I picked up that from that Mindful Way Through Depression book, and then I picked up the Headspace app, and they also use the breath focus technique, which I did. But then I got into because I wanted to do some more research, and I get antsy about some things. I like to read too much sometimes before I do things. And I stumbled across this website that they basically touted themselves as like an open source yoga system. And I guess it's a good thing to also mention that, the word yoga, 'cause sometimes people think of yoga as like the exercise, like you mentioned earlier, your friend had yoga classes.
Yeah.
But really, for people that aren't familiar, that are listening, the yoga exercise yoga is what they would refer to as asanas, which is just a Sanskrit word for postures or poses. And really, from like the research that I've done, most of that was designed to help people sit in meditation. So the idea was you did the exercises to help you be able to sit longer in order to meditate longer. So when people think of, when you and I use the word yoga, I think we're probably using it in a more specific way than most people might think. It's not like I don't do any yoga, like I do yoga, but it's meditation, and I do a little bit of stretching, but I don't do any exercise yoga. I just do, primarily meditation. But
yeah, yoga is, to me, there's like a true meaning of yoga, which really I think it just means a practice, like
right,
a regular sort of sacred practice.
Right, exactly. So it's like the exercise yoga that everyone's familiar with is one of 8 aspects of what they call full yoga or traditional yoga. So there's like, it's not like a religion or a system. It's just like a system that says these things will help you out. And so a lot of it's like don't lie and eat healthy and stuff like that. So there's aspects for like the body and the mind. And the poses are one of them, and those just kind of took off, back in the 60s or the 70s as a fitness craze. And
oh yeah, that's all it is now. It's marketed as a get in shape, wear your yoga pants fashion.
Right. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have no problem with girls in yoga pants, but that whole thing is nothing really related to what we're talking about when we use the word yoga. Not the exercises. There's no. Nobody. I don't sweat when I do. It takes like a minute for me to do the stretches, but
yeah.
But I bring that up because the system that I stumbled across, they're called advanced yoga practices, and when they use the word yoga, they mean more of the meditation side of things, but they do include some other stuff, and it's more based on the traditional aspects of yoga. So when I use the word yoga, that's what I'm referring to, is mostly meditation yoga.
What is that called again? What's the website?
It's aypsite.org. So AYP as in advanced yoga practices. And it's the guy that started it was he's down in Florida, I guess, but he started this up as a Yahoo group, and it was like kind of an informal discussion on a Yahoo chat board about, hey, we want to do this, but we don't really want to go to India or get a guru or, whatever. This is kind of like a self-directed thing, which was right up my alley because I was, like when you said you were going to the group meditations, that's something I might do at some point in time, but it just hasn't been anything that I've done to date. I'm definitely more of a lone wolf when it comes to a lot of this stuff. So, so this really, for anybody out there that's listening, this might appeal to them. Is the guy really is very straightforward in his writing about what's going on. And there's some weird stuff in there. I'm not going to deny it. I was like, what is going on here? But what I liked about it was that he was very straightforward about, look, these are some of the techniques. These are some of the things. This is what you're going to get into. And some of this stuff you find out, like the traditional way of learning, you wouldn't have learned this stuff for maybe 5 years. You wouldn't be introduced to some of these things. By then you're already like, you've already committed to this thing by now, and you don't even know what you're committing to. And I like the fact that he kind of just like I said, he called it open source yoga. So it was like, hey, this is what you're getting into. And I was like, I can get into some weird stuff if I know, what's going on here.
George, have you ever heard of transcendental meditation?
Well, I have, and this system is very similar to transcendental meditation from what I have been able to gather.
Yeah, because when you talk about like a system of meditation, that's what I think of. I don't know much about transcendental meditation aside from a couple of people who I know practice it. Tell me that there's like a membership fee or something like that, and they've got like this really expensive thing, and a lot of celebrities do it. So I think that's a lot of people get introduced into meditation because they see like Russell Simmons or some celebrity that they know has talked about it, so they get into it. But I think the transcendental meditation, the key component is a mantra. So you come up with your own special mantra, which is just a phrase that you say over and over and over and over again. Yeah, that's
the AYP techniques. That's what they use as a mantra. And he doesn't like his idea is this. Here's some starting points. You decide what you want to do. He's like, here's the information. You develop the practice as you see fit. So he's like, if you want to use breath focus, that's fine. And I was actually very aversive to the whole idea of mantra. It seemed very arbitrary. It seemed kind of weird. I was like, I don't, and that's another misconception. Like you don't say mantras out loud, which I had no idea. You repeat them mentally. So you're not.
That's important too.
Yeah, you're not chanting anything. You can. but the chanting is a whole separate thing. So mantras are not, like all that kind of stuff. That's not how you do mantra meditate. At least not this form. Maybe there is one that he lays out in the lessons is totally just, you think, and in fact, the idea is that you want to get to the point where you're actually thinking or remembering the thought as opposed to thinking the thought, which is a very subtle distinction, and it's very weird, but you will understand it as you do it more. But
wow, yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, I started out with the breath, moved into this, and I did the breath focus with the advanced yoga practice kind of regimen or techniques or whatever. I did the breath for a long time with that. And then I decided at one point in time, I'm like, I'm going to give the mantra a try, even though I think it's weird and a little bit, kooky. And, I was like, I don't get it. Why, what's the point? Who chose this word and why, or this phrase?
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, I did it. And I instantaneously, like without a doubt, because I was so consistent with my practice, which I should probably bring up at a second here, but I could tell immediately my meditations improved like that. Immediately they were better after I started doing the mantra. And I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on here, but my meditations got profoundly more deep, still. My mind was more focused. It was very bizarre to me, but
yeah. So can you share what the mantra is?
Well, in the AYP, it's just I am. And if you want to spell it,
yeah, that's a good one.
AYA. Is that what AY? Like the word I am, like I am, but not the word. Like it's not English. It's just the phonetics of the sounds.
Yeah.
So you think in your head, you repeat the phrase mentally. I am, and he suggests spelling out AYAM so that you're not thinking of the words. And what the meaning is behind the words. But
that's something that really intrigues me. I'm very curious on that because, you can, one thing I like to say is thank you, especially in the gratitude meditation, just repeat thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, over and over again, because you're like appealing to some listener who's listening when you say these mantras, and it's like the universe, the source of all creation, like it gets kind of mystical, but like there's the listener out there that's you, the deepest part of you is listening. And when you say thank you, you can get some really intense emotional sensations go throughout your body. Like you'll definitely get a lot of shivers and chills and goosebumps. And I think those are resonant frequencies like happening within your body. It's like your body's paying attention. It's responding to you saying thank you. So when you say I am, it's a really like metaphysical statement, and it's,
the way he talks about it in his lessons is that you're not supposed to, supposed to is an active word here, but you're not supposed to go into the words I am. Like they shouldn't mean anything in English. Like if you're in a different language, if you're speaking a different language, you still want to use that same. So he says it's about the sound. There's modifications to the mantra later on that you can add, and they have nothing to do with any meaning or anything. So I see what you're saying, but in this system, they're saying, at least at that for this, he said, you're not focusing on any meaning behind these words. These are just sounds that you're trying to.
That's a good point, though. Yeah, you're right about that, because the non-English thing, because people can get tripped up with language, but like the sound, that's so interesting to me. There was a mantra meditation for lucid dreaming that someone was telling me about, and they said the mantra was Rome, Grome. And to repeat that mentally, internally, over and over again, Rome, Grome, Rome, Grome. And it's like, it's meaningless, right? So you don't have a thought associated with it. So you're really just the sound, the internal sound. You're not actually making a sound, you know what I mean? But you're speaking it internally to yourself. So I want to look into that. It's really fascinating to me how that works, like what that's doing inside your body and why it works.
Yeah, I trust me. I read up on it, asked a bunch of annoying questions on the message boards over on the website. Because I'm the skeptic guy a lot of times in these situations. But I'm like, why these words? Who chose these things? Why these specific ones? But at one point in time, I said, you know what? I'm just going to try it. I don't need to understand why that works or whatever. I just need to give it a chance. And the difference in my meditations was so distinct and obvious that I've never gone back. I was like, there's no way. I mean, my meditations have improved dramatically since then. This was last summer when I did that. But yeah, I sit for. I mean, I have a pretty involved routine. I mean, probably more to get into than this podcast. We're looking to cover. But I mean, I sit for 20 minutes twice a day now. And I do some breathing techniques before I do meditation too, as well. So, but I sit for sure if I can. Like you said earlier, if I can only do 5 minutes, I do that. But for the most part, I usually can get in at least in the evening. I can get a longer sit in without a doubt. Sometimes in the morning and not so much, but I do try to sit. What they recommend is doing it twice daily before each, before the morning and evening meal. And just, so your body's not digesting food is the big reason. So you're, empty stomach. But what else was I going to mention? 20 minutes. Yeah. And what was the other thing that I had to ask you? What you do, the technique. Oh yeah. It's the where I sit.
Yeah.
Even though I mentioned earlier, you don't need to sit cross-legged. I do that only because, again, I'm a drill sergeant, and I like to. My whole thing was, if I'm going to sit and do this every day, I learned this from learning the guitar. I'm like, the way you learn it is to start off right off the bat, just do what you have to do from the beginning. So I'm like, I'm going to start stretching and getting used to sitting this way. And when you mentioned the 20-minute thing, that's one thing I wanted to bring up. Is that I found, because that's one of the things too, your first meditations, especially if you try to sit down, especially if you try to sit cross-legged or anything like that, man, your muscles are not designed to do that yet. So you don't even know how to sit up straight until you've done it. So that's one of the first things you need to do through, I always make a joke that your first job in meditation is to get rid of all the expectations that you have and all the misconceptions. And then your job is to get your muscles strong enough to be able to sit long enough to actually meditate, to get into that state. But I found it took me at least 6 to 8 months of sitting. And I just sit cross-legged on the bed with some pillows, propping up my lower back. But now I'm in a spot now where my muscles I can sit that way and hit into a super, super deep, still, physically still state pretty quickly. And I could probably meditate I've done it for an hour without a doubt,
Yeah.
Now, like I said, my back is supported by pillows, but I have a pretty good, you just have to build up your muscles. So you're going to be sore after you meditate for the first few times, and maybe for the first few weeks or months even. But over time, your muscles will strengthen, and that really goes back to that whole, where the asanas come in, where the poses and the exercise aspect of yoga comes in. So you do need some stamina in order to do some of this stuff. It's not like people think this is relaxing, and it can be, but it can be a little bit. You can focusing on the mind can wear you out, because there's a lot. Your mind's can be super active, and it can be tiring to pay attention to it, because we're so used to it.
Yeah, it really is tiring sometimes paying attention, and that's why it's hard to do it, because you're like, I'm just going to sit in silence. That's easy, right? But maintaining attention on something is really difficult. It does take energy and willpower, because by default, your mind wants to follow all those thoughts and just go to wherever shiny, bright object or a sound that you hear in the room. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it does. That's why it's like sometimes meditation is not the most fun thing to want to sit down and do. It's like to at least start it, especially if you're doing it a while and it's become sort of a thing, you know what it is and you kind of do it. Like for me, sometimes it's hard for me to sit down and meditate, even though I love doing it when I'm doing it. And it's not like working out where you're like lifting weights and it's strenuous physically. It can be strenuous physically if you're sitting a long time and you're not used to it, but it's just the paying attention for a long period of time. I mean, that can be boring for somebody, especially if they're constantly used to the internet.
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing, is we're so used to having distractions and distracting ourselves and having, something new and novel grabbing our attention, and to really sit and that's what interests me a lot about it anyways, is that it's a challenge, and it's like, I like to see, it's almost like, who can stand on their stand on their foot for the longest, won't stand on one leg for the longest period of time. And in some degree, meditation's like that. Like, how long can I go before I get antsy? And it's without a doubt, like we said earlier, you will see improvements in certain things. Now, you may not think of them as super dramatic, and I didn't either at first until you kind of one of those things you have to reflect on in hindsight. But you will be able to look back and go, oh yeah, I didn't like fly off the handle when I was in traffic and that guy cut me off, and I didn't. I was in line at the grocery store and I was totally paying attention to where I was as opposed to being off and getting on my phone and looking for something to distract me. I was actually really trying to soak in the environment and really listen to everything and look at everything and really be where I was at. And it's interesting over time how these things, it's like the anxiety of moving somewhere, or like I recently, got a new car and it was like really weird because I had a car for 13 years. I had this old, my Jeep, and I was switching over to a new car. It was really weird and disconcerting, and there was a lot of strange things going on. But now on the new car, I'm like used to it. And it's like meditation is the same way, where it might be weird at first to do a lot of this stuff, but just by doing it every single day, you get used to it. And then eventually this becomes it becomes familiar. Like he said, it's familiar. You may not look forward to actually doing it, but once you're doing it, like I find myself, and this is kind of a weird analogy, but when you say you have cats, do you have a dog?
No dog.
Well, I'm sure you either had one or know people who have one. Your cats probably do the same thing. You come home and they're ready to get fed or go out or whatever, and they know when you're coming home and when it's time to do certain things. And I find that my body is almost like a pet for me now, where like when it gets close to meditation time, my body will start getting into a relaxation mode. I can feel it happening. I mean, it's not even like I don't have to do it. I can feel my body starting to want to get that relaxation feeling. And I can, that energy sensation I was mentioning earlier, that'll start kicking in. And I can really kind of feel like, the whole thing. I mean, I can do it, but just by thinking about it, just by talking about it now, it's starting to want to do it a little bit. So it's one of those things that you train yourself over time. And then all of a sudden it's like, you don't have to do this stuff on purpose. You've conditioned yourself to it's like it's like you're a drummer. You don't think about what you're doing with all your limbs. If you did, you couldn't do it. You have to do it by not thinking about it and having practice it so much. And I think that's a huge benefit for people. Is not only is the mind, can you have a more familiar experience with your mind and not let it run away, but also your body. You know what it feels like to be relaxed, and it's like, instead of just going, oh, this feels relaxing, it's like, no, I really know what that feels like, and I can actually trigger that because I'm now, I've got the habit of going into that state on a regular basis. So it's there's a lot of little things like that seem, they may not be these super cosmic experiences, but you grow to like. Someone had brought this up to me, and when I was having some doubts about meditation, and I'm sure you have the same feeling, where I asked this guy, I was like, well, I'm like, I don't really know what I'm getting out of this. And this wasn't even that long ago, but he was like, just don't do it. And I'm like, nah, that's not going to happen. And he was like, why? And I'm like, I like doing it. It's always like, it's easy to think like nothing's happening until someone says, well, don't do it for a month. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not, that's not going to happen. I don't like when I have to skip it. If I have to skip one, like I don't let it happen when I skip a day. But if I have to skip like the morning or cut the morning short, that bums me out. You know what I mean? It's like I do have situations where I think, is this really working? Is anything really happening here? But then I realize like I wouldn't want to give this up now.
Yeah, you brought up a couple things that I want to talk about. So the first thing is benefits. I mean, so we talked a lot about what we've experienced, but like the most common benefits is a state of being that is more content and peaceful and happy. I mean, it's really one of the best things you can do for your well-being. Not only do you become aware of your thoughts and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's a useful tool that helps you identify your triggers, and you can work into that stuff and change some of your emotional patterns and repetitive thought processes. You could do all that, but by bringing your awareness to your breath, you're centering yourself. You're bringing yourself to the present moment. You're no longer thinking for the future or worrying about the past. And so much of our suffering comes from not being in the present moment. And if you study Buddhist teachings and a lot of meditation practice, it's about becoming present. And so much of our well-being comes from living in that state of presence. And if you've ever like talked to somebody who's in a state of presence, you feel like so much of a connection with them. You can definitely talk to someone who's not present and they're looking on their phone. They're like distracted. You can tell their mind is somewhere else. They're thinking about something. That's like, no one likes to experience that. But like when you're with somebody who's truly present, then it feels so much more comforting. And so like you can be with yourself at that present moment. I mean, there's a whole book about it, The Power of Now. It's an amazing book by Eckhart Tolle. And then so many other books are about living in the present moment. Okay. But there's a whole thing about that time doesn't actually exist. The present is all there ever is, like there is no such thing as time. It's only a construct. That's a theoretical thing that has been kind of proven or whatever, but that's another topic. But the power of presence is like what meditation will teach you, to be present almost all the time. So you don't even have to do a meditation sitting process. So George, I know you do twice a day. I was talking to this one guy who says, yeah, I don't meditate anymore. I said, really? Like, why? He's like, I don't need to meditate. He's like, everything you do is a meditation. Like whether you're washing the dishes, whether you're typing on a computer, you're typing, you're speaking with somebody, you can shift yourself to the present moment and observe and watch and feel in presence, full presence. And then that's a meditation in and of itself. So the sitting thing, I think, is a good practice routine to get into, but eventually like you can let go of the need to have any sort of routine at all. And that's another state of presence, another state of letting go. And, George, I know that you're really attached to like, if someone says, give up meditation, you're like, no, I don't want to give it up. I mean, I sympathize with that too, because if someone told me to give up my practice, I wouldn't want to do it. But then sometimes it's like, why am I so attached to it anyway? Like, what am I afraid of losing if I don't have my meditation practice? Like everything, it can be a meditation. Like me doing this podcast can be in a state of meditation while I do it. So that'd be a great state to be in, of course. We're not always in there, but as soon as you bring your awareness to the present moment, and you can keep it there and hold it. Sometimes it's tough to multitask if you're trying to do something like speak in front of a crowd, for example, and you all of a sudden became conscious of your present moment, and you might like slip up on your words and stumble, like you become self-conscious all of a sudden. But yeah. So how you hear me say that, George? So how do you react to that when you've got such a regimented practice?
Well, I kind of agree with you to some degree. I don't think I don't want to sound like I'm super attached to it like that, but I definitely, it's like you gotta. I try to remind myself that, like, just like you said, like the point of this is really a practice more than, like one of the things in that AYP system that they like to point out is that the meditation, like your meditation sits, like you are not looking to have experiences during the sits. You're looking to have the experiences during the rest of your daily life. And that's really what they focus on. They're like, your point isn't to have some kind of crazy experiences while you're sitting down meditating. And that points to kind of, that whole idea of getting attached to the meditation practices. The point of this all is what your friend said, is to put it aside and to be able to just say, no, I don't need that anymore. And I really, for me, I definitely, let's put it this way, I benefit from it dramatically. So
yeah,
not ready to put it aside.
If it serves you, keep doing it. You know what I mean?
Right. And I'll tell you, I do get, and, this is something that's, you and I have both encountered and discussed before, as far as like the self-development path is, you can turn into a perfectionist about getting better. You know what I mean? And
yep.
Sometimes I think I might overdo it, where I'm like, when I first started out meditation, I was so, particular about like, I'm not missing a day, and I would turn down things to do. If I was invited somewhere, I'm like, no, if I got to meditate. And then I realized, like, that's ridiculous. And I know, and they don't recommend you do that either. They say you should definitely not let it interfere with your life that way. But I was like, I don't care. I want this to happen. I want to, experience these things, and I want to, accelerate the progress and whatever. So I was definitely a little bit more insane about it when I first started out, but I'm way more laid back about it now. But
yeah.
But I think you can get an unhealthy level of attachment to like you said, to that sit that you don't really need it. And that's the thing too, is like you said earlier, other things can be meditations. And that's one of the things that that's why I wanted to bring up on this podcast, what you do versus what I do, because there's also 7,500 other techniques that you could probably find besides the two or the five that we've mentioned. And there's not like this one system to do. And it's really, because I do, the mindfulness thing, especially that Raptitude blog that I've been reading a lot, he focuses on that a lot too. And, but I've been trying to put that into practice with like, washing the dishes and doing other things. We talked about this last podcast too, but, I look at those kind of activities where I'm trying to, integrate the experience more into the daily life with the activities of the daily life, as opposed to this thing that's separated from it. And I think, who knows what's going to happen in the future, but I would like to be at the point where the meditations are almost like a training wheel for how to, move on to, another one of my bicycling analogies, but, I think it fits though. It's like, that's how I look at these things. And for me right now, I need the training wheels, but I don't want to become too, like you said, I don't want to become too attached to them. I think that could be done to an unhealthy degree too.
Yeah. And I want to talk just a smidge about some of the more, higher states that you can achieve in meditation. I hesitate to use the word achieve because it falls into the same sort of goal setting, accomplishment, achievement thing that some people will get into with meditation. They'll try to achieve something and get to some place, but the whole point is to drop that attachment most of the time, or recognize that you have that, because what that does is it just sets up expectations that cause suffering, and we all know that that's sort of part of the reason why we suffer. So, but I think having some sort of goals or aspirations is kind of a healthy thing, as long as you're not too attached to them outcomes. Like when you started your meditation habit, George, you wanted to go all into it, right? And you wouldn't have done that had you not had some sort of expectation in the back of your mind about where you could get with it. And I think a lot of people who start meditating feel like, well, where's the end point? Like, I want to get to the enlightenment. Where's
the boss level?
Yeah. Where's the end? Like, what's the fastest way to get enlightened? Because, when Sean Webb talked to me, or not talked to me personally, but when he talked about his enlightenment experience, this is really fascinating. So when he talked about his enlightenment experience, that was the first time he was the first person I heard talk about this word enlightenment, and he was able to achieve it through a meditation. And when he described it, he basically had a lot of physical sensations of leaving his body and then going up and experiencing this feeling that people call God. And he was able to get all the answers to every question in the universe. And it was the state of bliss and joy and peace and love. And he knew everything. He was able to see situations that are going on in the world and understand why it's all happening. I mean, it was a mystical experience, transformed his life. And when I heard that, it brought tears to my eyes, because something deep down about it resonated with me very deeply. And I wanted to have an enlightenment experience like so badly. And some people will take hallucinogenic drugs or psychedelics and they'll achieve a state like that. But I'm a drug-free person. So being able to achieve something like that in a meditation was like totally up my alley. I was striving for it. And I remember my first time like experiencing something like that. It was like I started to feel like this twitchiness in my face, and my heart started pounding like really rapidly. I started to get my breathing. I had to like consciously breathe, because it was almost like I was becoming short of breath and I didn't know what was happening. And I'm like, is this the enlightenment experience about to happen? And I was like trying harder to achieve it. And then of course, like it didn't happen. It kind of went away, and I felt sort of like, oh man, I wonder what that was. But this is where it kind of gets really interesting to me, because this meditation, I kind of stopped putting that. I stopped trying. I mean, that's part of the problem, is trying. You have to let go in order to actually experience some of this stuff. So if you try, you just block yourself from doing it. It's backwards. But then the meditation, the mindfulness practice helped me out a lot in my night terrors, my nightmares that I would have in the middle of the night. So I've talked about this on my blog, where I would wake up in the middle of the night with a tremendous state of terror and fear, and I would feel like there's evil in the room, like literally like some being is in the room, and it would be totally irrational, right? And then I would be trying my hardest to wake myself up, but I'd be paralyzed, and then I couldn't scream or do anything like that. And eventually, like, my wife would shake me awake, and I would be like, "Oh, thank you. You know, you saved my life." Like, "Oh, good thing that's over." Like, it was another one of those episodes, you know, I had those all growing up, and then maybe once every couple of months I would have those. But then the meditation helped me be mindful. And I told myself, next time I experience one of those, I'm going to just try to observe instead of trying to wake myself up. And, you know, I couldn't predict when I would have one, but then when I did, the remembrance of to be observant and mindful, triggered me to not resist anymore. So I just looked at it as I was meditating, basically, and the fear went away immediately, and I floated up out of my body. That was the most incredible experience ever. I was so excited. I was standing in my room outside of my body, feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm having an out of body experience. And so I ran down the hallway to try to tell my wife, and I ended up going through her like a ghost. It was really weird. And then that excited me so much that I snapped back into my body, my eyes opened, and I had full memory of this whole experience. And I said, that was incredible. Like, I just hurry up and wrote it down. And that's another topic I've been able to take that experience and recreate it. I started learning all about it. It really opened my eyes up and I started reading books about out of body experiences. And like you mentioned, Robert Monroe's book earlier in this podcast about journeys out of the body, where he had a spontaneous out of body experience, not through meditation or anything like that, but he was able to, he was first really scared about it, but then when he was able to have it again and again, and then figure out how to do them on purpose or put himself in a position to have one on purpose. So I learned from him. I learned from a lot of the techniques he used and started teaching myself how to have out of body experiences at will. And it's a little bit more difficult than having it at will. You can't just say hocus pocus and poof, you're out of your body. But the meditation is like a super awesome training wheels to have out of body experiences. And that's where you open up the door to mystical experiences that people will have, that you can experience your true spiritual essence. You can experience life outside physical reality. You can experience different states of consciousness. It gets really, really deep. So that's another episode. But I mean, I think that's where you can see where it can go. And had I never started meditating, that never would have happened. So yeah, George, what do you think about that?
No out of body experiences on this end, but that's one thing that has to be brought up, is that there are a lot of claims for these supernormal states of experience or consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And that's that's I won't lie, that's something that interests me. That's one of those things, like the big question, like what's going on. That's one of the things I think what meditation is will help you. Like, again, I should come back to what drew me to meditation was the promise of direct experience. So when you mention these things, I've never experienced them, but when people say, if you do these things, this will help you experience these for yourself, and you don't have to believe. I like that. That's where I come in from. I'm an open-minded person, but I'm also a little bit more down to earth about things, where I'm like, I'm not going to say that I don't believe somebody if they tell me they had an experience. Because, going back to, at the beginning, you had mentioned lucid dreaming, and that was something that interested me when I was younger as well. And another one of those things where I'm like, I'm never going to have the patience to sit and practice it. But, when I was probably about, I forget when this was, probably about 10 years now, but I made a point at this point in time in my life where I'm like, I want to see if this is for real. I've read a lot of books and said that, you can do this. And then you read a lot of books. This is before the internet, but they said that there's a lot of books that said, oh, this is a bunch of, BS. And these guys are just having these subjective experiences and labeling them differently, blah, blah, blah. And one night I finally had a lucid dream. And once I had that, it was one of those experiences. I mean, since you've had them, you understand. I mean, they're not that uncommon either. So I'm sure a lot of people listening have had them. But once you have that experience, you can't like someone can't argue you out of it anymore. You know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah,
that's what I'm looking for that's what interests me with the meditation. Like the lucid dream literature always said, if you do these things, this is your best chance of having this happen, and you can have it happen for yourself. You don't have to believe anybody, and that's what I liked. And then especially coming to that AYP system, is like I said, there's some big claims in there. Some of these things, enlightenment and transcending the ego, or transcending the sense of self, the individual sense of self, and having this cosmic consciousness kind of an experience.
Oh yeah.
So when you read these things, you're like, but then on top of it, they say you don't have to believe anything. You just have to do these things, and then you can find out for yourself. And that's what really appealed to me. Now, you mentioned earlier, the drug aspect. You said you're drug free. I have taken psychedelic drugs before. We talked about this.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm actually curious because Sean Webb mentions on his podcast. He said, I'm going to take some LSD to see how it compares to his enlightenment experience. And I hope that he does it, because I'm really curious what he has to say, because they've done studies in the past where they've given, heavy duty meditators, LSD and asked them to compare the states of mind. And it's an interesting question to say, is this a biochemical reaction? I mean, to some degree it has to be. I mean, even enlightenment is biochemical, because we have a body that's experiencing this through neurotransmitters. So
sure. Have you heard the Ram Dass story?
I don't really know the story.
He experienced his first spiritual experiences through LSD in the 60s or 70s, and was so, like mind blown. He ended up going to India to look for a guru, and all that kind of stuff. And he gave the guru some LSD. And the guru was wanted more. So basically he gave him his entire stash of LSD. And it would have been 10, 15 times the normal dose that he would have taken, a normal person. And then the guru didn't even react. He was just like, that's nice. Thank you. He did not have a mystical experience. So it's his thought was well, gee, he must already be at a level that LSD has no effect on him. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean but that's also assuming that that the mystical, quote unquote, mystical experience from meditation is the same thing as you have in a psychedelic.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
So there's enough people that seem to think that it's very similar. I mean, there was an interesting podcast I listened to. I'll have to dig it up and send it to you for the show notes, but. These were scientists too. They weren't. They were talking about meditation, but they were talking also about brain science and psychology. And one of the things that the guest that was on the show was talking about was that he believed that LSD or psychedelic drugs and meditation helped you reach a very similar place by triggering certain ways of using the mind, and it was a level of the mind where you're not labeling things or categorizing them. So the idea is when you look at a flower, it's how a kid would look at things, where you're looking at something and really using your senses, as opposed to saying, oh, that's a flower. I already know what that is. We already have that in a filing cabinet in my brain of it's a plant and it's red and it's this. We don't look anymore. That's our minds are designed not to look, because it's once we know what something is, it's not a threat, or it's not food, we move on. So the idea is that you're reaching these states where you're actually perceiving things without that judgment, without that categorization. So I said, I'll find a link, but it was an interesting discussion about the two things. But I'll have to look up Ram Dass. Like I said, I don't know. I've heard his name before. I just didn't know his whole story, his whole deal.
Yeah, he's an awesome person. He's got a lot of talks, and he's kind of like Alan Watts. He's got a lot of stuff on YouTube. Good guy. There's several documentaries. One of them was called it's on Netflix, or it was. It's called Fierce Grace, where he had a stroke, and it was kind of his way of dealing with having a stroke, and he thought he was enlightened, and then here's his stroke, and he didn't know how to handle it, and it was pretty interesting. It was life has a way of bringing you to what you need to learn in such sometimes a very fierce way, like having a stroke or something like that, or if you want to have an out of body experience, or maybe some people doesn't want to have one, and then they get in a car accident and they're forced into an out of body experience, a near death experience. But I think you would actually like the whole out of body experience stuff too, because it puts it can help you experience directly what a lot of these religions that try to teach that you need to read these books and follow these masters and do all of these things to get into heaven. You can start to have direct experience with what all that stuff is and figure it all out for yourself. Like it's a direct path to spiritual experience if you choose to do it that way. So it's all based on direct experience and self-exploration.
And that's one of the things I liked about that Robert Monroe book, which because it really surprised me how much of a scientist he was. I was like, oh, this guy's not like I was expecting to be some crazy new ager,
right.
Crazy, I don't know why I'm saying crazy, but do these meditations and you'll have these experiences. He was very regimented of, he would approach it the way I would. And he was, like I said, he was the guy who was like, watch out for poetic descriptions of stuff. And I'm just going to describe what I experienced, like without trying to interpret it. And I really liked that about his books. Now that said, I tried to give some of his techniques a try, but they didn't seem to do anything for me. I don't know if I have at this point in time, if I have the dedication. I mean, I already got a lot of stuff on my plate these days, and it's like that's another thing that seemed like it. He's like, "Oh, just lay on your couch for 2 hours and do this. Like, wait for the vibration to kick in." I'm like, "Dude, how don't you have this guy did a lot of stuff?" And I'm like, "How did he have time to like lay on this couch at 2 PM and do this stuff day after day?" I'm surprised where people find the time sometimes, but I do like the fact that he said, do this and you will have the experience. And I would trust me, I would love to do it. It seemed like, I don't know, it seemed very, very out of my reach, at least. I mean, it sounds like
that's what's really tough, man, because I think if you're not really drawn to it, you're not really interested. I mean, I know you're interested, but I mean, if you don't feel like a huge calling to like want to do it, like you did with meditation, it's like you made time for it. And that's the same thing with like dreams. If you don't really care about dreams, then you're not going to really remember them. But as soon as you start caring, you start to remember them, and then you can really get into it. And I think I went through a period where I was really obsessed with having an out-of-body experience. And so I read everything I could read about it. I read about lucid dreaming and trying to figure out the difference between them and astral projection. What's the difference between all those things, and really start to understand it. But I couldn't help but read these people's firsthand experiences and feel like I wanted that so bad. Like I knew something about it was for me, I guess. And trying all these techniques was really difficult at first because I had already had one spontaneously. So I kind of knew already what it was like. And that's what Robert did. He had one without trying. And that's what's the crazy thing about the whole thing. People don't even have to try and they'll have one. And that's like, and you can sit there and try really hard to have one and practice all these techniques that people teach, but you might never have one. And that's why it's like almost unfair. It's like you see people talk about it and you're like I just heard a guy saying that he's only ever had lucid dreams. He's never known that dreams aren't lucid.
I know a guy like that. I was talking to him on Twitter years ago. He was like, he's like, I don't like having lucid. He's like, I hate it. I can't sleep. I don't get rest, And I was like, come on, dude, that's not cool.
Yeah, I know. So it's like, and then same thing happens when I hear this guy talk about having all these like alien abduction type experiences. And I'm like, I never see those. I want to see them. And he's like, be careful what you wish for because it's not pleasant. I don't want it, So like a lot of these people don't want these experiences and they have them. But it's just funny. I find it interesting how like even if you want it so badly, it may not be in the cards for you, like type of thing. It might not be part of your, and I feel like unless you feel a calling to it, you might find a real interest to it. But I think there are some techniques you can try. I mean, William Buhlman, he's another guy who teaches at the Monroe Institute, which Robert Monroe started this whole institute on out-of-body exploration and consciousness and stuff. So, and same thing with Thomas Campbell. Have you heard of Thomas Campbell? He wrote the book, My Big Toe, My Big Theory of Everything.
Mm-mm.
He's someone you might like because he was a physicist or something like that. And he got into transcendental meditation and he was a super skeptic. The first book is really interesting because he talks about how he got into meditation and these altered states of consciousness. And then he was trying to put it all together with his scientific mind. And he's like, well, who am I? What's the meaning of life? And he wrote a trilogy of books. I mean, it got kind of boring for me because he's really long-winded. But you may dig it. Look up My Big Toe. Or look up maybe some videos of him on YouTube or something because
what's his name?
Thomas Campbell. He was one of the founding members of the Monroe Institute. and helped kind of develop the systems and develop the technology, the audio technology that Robert Monroe uses, the binaural beats, which he calls hemisync. So have you ever tried using binaural beats in your meditation?
I downloaded a couple of apps and tried it out. It didn't really seem to do anything that that's some of this stuff. That's what's tricky too, is like, that was one of my big questions when I first started out, because for me, like, I have not had any dramatic experiences. I'm like, who are these dudes thousands of years ago sitting around trying this stuff out to figure out what works? Because it's not like I'm doing things and like 2 days later I'm like, oh yeah, that worked or that didn't. I mean, I'm talking about weeks and months of taking someone else's word that this stuff's going to work. So like the binaural beats thing, I think a lot of these things may come down to, like you said earlier, if you're sensitive to it or they align with whatever's going on with you, then they might happen quickly, but a lot of this stuff, like the binaural beats app I've tried, I had no discernible experience from it. I mean, it seemed relaxing to some degree, but that could have been total placebo effect. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's what's tough, because, Robert Monroe's got a whole like technology that he sells, and he calls it hemisync, and it's trademarked, and he sells audio CDs, and apparently they've got some technique for making binaural beats that someone else doesn't have. It's like, I feel like it's kind of a racket at some point, like it's just selling tricks and techniques that someone can get to reach altered states. When, I mean, in the end, it can happen for someone who doesn't even use any of that stuff. And like you said, thousands of years ago, they didn't have this technology. They didn't have the internet with books and blog articles and teachers everywhere teaching you how to do stuff. That's kind of one of the reasons why I think they were able to experience a lot of these stuff, because they were not so digitally connected. They didn't have such broad reach of culture where they can be influenced by so many different things. I mean, we have so much influence coming into our consciousness all the time. We're so distracted. Our minds, we live through the scientific paradigm where our minds basically control everything. Logic and rational thinking and materialism are kind of the day. But back then, it was a lot more like a right-brained existence where you didn't know a lot of this stuff. You didn't know why you had these experiences, but you had them.
Yeah, that's a good point. That because we were living in a different consciousness completely back then. I mean, I was thinking about this. I was reading some books about that inner critic, that inner judge, that inner voice that you have that's criticizing. And I'm like, what did people do before language? Like, how did you talk to yourself before there was even language even existed? I mean, how did people experience the world? That's an interesting. You talk to yourself with language in your head. So what did you do before you had that? I mean,
must have been a very blissful state of existence, I tell you.
Well, I mean, speaking of and that's another good point. Speaking of all the technology and the meditation stuff, is I made a point of, like, I used to have the apps and the timers and all that stuff. I got rid of all that crap. I try to go a little bit more, I guess like paleo meditation, if you want to call it that. But nice. You know what I mean? Like, no tools. I try to figure, like, I'm getting better and better at being able to figure out when 20 minutes, like, I know when 15 minutes, I can tell when I get antsy, it's 15 minutes, and I can tell almost without a doubt now, I can tell when 15 minutes is up. So it's, the timers definitely help, and I definitely look at the phone to see where I'm at with time. But, I think the less you can rely on, external tools and stuff, the easier it is for you to, like you said earlier, meditate wherever you're at, whether you're washing the dishes or, at the store. So it's like, if you don't need to have all these extra things, we're already attached enough to these devices. I would suggest, like, not even, like, if you can start off not using them, you don't need them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because we are living in a culture that is becoming increasingly dependent on technology. And if you kind of, project into the future where this is going, it's getting to the point where, like, you've got companies like Facebook, Google, and they want you to become totally dependent on them to kind of exist in a lot of ways. They're talking about, like, always on Wi-Fi, always being connected, and, track all your exercise and all this kind of stuff, and log into this every single day and get you to keep coming back. I think that could be a really interesting future podcast episode, is technology. But yeah, back in the day, technology was not the thing. And back in the day, you had a lot of people having mystical experiences that were pretty normal. Paranormal stuff was more normal. There were witches, and psychic abilities were, a normal thing for a lot of people. And it was kind of just, they didn't talk about it. They didn't think about it, but that's kind of been trained out of us in a lot of ways as we kind of grow into a Western materialist society, and we become ever increasingly reliant on technology to do a lot of the things that our bodies are actually capable of doing in the first place. So, I mean, especially all of this kind of communication, and I mean, you don't need apps to meditate. Sure, I think they help, but if you're a technology lover and they help you meditate, do it. But the more you can get yourself weaned off of the addiction to technology, you're going to end up activating more of your natural intuitive thinking processes that are going to help bring you into more states, more wholeness, more with your whole being, more right brain, more creative thinking. The less you can rely on using technology to aid you in all of these things. So I agree with you.
Well, I mean, and the technology stuff, like we talked earlier, it's almost like an external version of the chattering mind. It's distractions, and if you're trying to meditate and extend that into your day-to-day life, constantly check, because think about it, constantly checking your phone, checking your email, whatever you're doing with your phone all day, is really no different than that incessant, repetitive chatter in the mind that you're constantly addicted to talking to yourself. And it's the same, like the meditation practices, to me, is designed to help you take control over that stuff. And if you're not putting that into practice, if you don't like using, that's what kind of got me off of using the phone and timers and apps for all that stuff, because I'm like, it was kind of incongruous to use the apps to get away from that mindset of being addicted to these apps and stuff like that. So these distractions. So it just you definitely don't need them. That's, we both agree with that, is you don't need them. So yes, like the Headspace app I do recommend, because it's like a book. It's a little interactive walkthrough, but you only need to use that thing for about 5 days. You will get everything you need to know out of it, and then delete it from your phone and move on and just start meditating and do it on your own.
Yeah, beautifully said, George. And I think that about wraps things up. So, but before we end the show, I'd like to provide some resources and some kind of, just what are your favorite resources for meditation, George? Do you have a list, or you want me to go first?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
All right. So we talk about Headspace. That's one I really recommend for beginners. And there's calm.com, which is another good one for beginners if you just want to take some time out. There's Stop, Think, and Breathe, which is an app. We're talking about using apps now. We just got done saying you shouldn't be using these apps, but for beginners, it's really kind of good to get in the habit, build the habit or whatever. But Stop, Think, and Breathe is good because it lets you input your emotions, and then it kind of gives you your top 10 emotions, gratitude, like anxiety. So you can get a picture. If you do it for a while, you can kind of start to get a picture of who you are. And I think it's pretty cool. And so you would log into it, you'd pick your different emotions, and then it would give you a guided meditation based on how you're feeling. And then another one I used was Zen Friend, which was more of like a social meditation app. You got to you log it into it, and it's there are 3,000 other people meditating at this very moment, join the fun. So, I mean, that was kind of cool, as it had a timer on it. And there's definitely a bunch of different timers, meditation timers you can download from the App Store. But for books, I definitely recommend Mindfulness in Plain English. Yeah. It's a really awesome one. One of the very first ones I read. And I lent that to my mother-in-law recently because she just finished reading. I lent her The Power of Now, and she's like, I don't understand. I really like all this stuff, but I don't understand it. And I'm like, all right, here, you actually need to start meditating, because you can't just continue to read and then figure everything out through reading. Just meditate, and then don't worry about figuring anything out. You'll start to understand, you'll start to know what being in the present moment feels like. So for someone who doesn't know how to meditate or doesn't have time for it, read Mindfulness in Plain English. And again, I recommend The Power of Now. And if you want to go further, there's a guy by the name of Adyashanti. He's got a ton of books on it. One of them is called The Way of Liberation. I recommend that. And another one called True Meditation. And The End of Your World is another one for advanced meditators who feel like they've kind of hit a crossroads or hit a wall with meditation. And then, they need something else to kind of give them some perspective. So Adyashanti is another good one I recommend. So That's pretty much my resources. Oh yeah, Sean Webb's I Am Spirituality podcast. That'll help give your left brain some perspective on what the ego is, what meditation will do, how your emotions work. It's good. It kind of helps things fall into place. George, what about you?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. I had the same reservations about Sean Webb's podcast, the I Am Spirituality, just because of the word spirituality in the title.
Oh my gosh, I know.
I listened to it on your recommendation, and I really like that guy's podcast a lot. And he definitely leans towards using the word God and spirituality and something like that. It might turn some people off, but I agree with you. Give him a chance. You have to listen. I think it's episode 20 is when he talks about his enlightenment experience. You don't have to believe anything he says, but you should. It's nice to have some guy who's down to earth talking about his experiences that you can, take what you want out of it. But I agree, his descriptions for the mental states and especially for the emotional states and how fear arises and in the mind. That was some really interesting stuff that I'm still digesting. I actually went back and listened to those last week because I really wanted to try to understand those a little bit better. But
he says he's got a book coming out that's going to blow the doors off of everything that's been written about spirituality, which, I mean, okay, that's a huge claim.
That guy has got lots of hyperbole, but his credit, he has a lot of interesting insights on the top of it. So I'm not going to call him out on it. Sure. But I also agree that Mindfulness in Plain English was a really good book. That was one of the first ones I read too. It can be a little repetitive from what I recall, but it was a great, if you don't know anything at all about this stuff, that's a good, it's non-denominational. It's 100% about what I should probably reread that too.
Yeah, me too.
I really enjoyed that book. I'm going to, just reiterate the website for the lessons that I follow, which is aypsite.org, and that's advanced yoga practices. And the advanced just means more. The idea that it should be called refined yoga practices is because that's what his intention is that he's kind of distilled these things down to a very simple set of techniques that are advanced, but they're not difficult. So they don't think of it like you can be a beginner and go to advanced yoga practices. But so bad name, good website. It's a little confusing, but if you go in the sidebar on the left-hand side, there's a kind of start here lessons that he has in there. They're not organized great. Now the books are superb. They're not free, but they're not expensive either, and you can get digital versions, and the audiobook versions are really good too. I got those. But the books are a little bit more organized than the website. But the website's totally free, and that's the website that kind of just opens the whole thing up to, if you really want to dig into the stuff and understand what's going on. You don't need a lot of the advanced stuff for meditation, but he gets into like yoga and different breathing techniques and stuff that can enhance all this stuff. Now, the other books that I would recommend, if you're a little bit more on the nerdy side like I am, there's a book that I stumbled across. It's also free. It's called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. Again, this has nothing to do with Buddhism or religion. It's just literally the teachings of the Buddha that he focuses on. But this guy is hilarious. I think his name is Daniel Ingram. But he's a really... irreverence is a tame word to say, but he definitely is not like a very, what you would consider a traditionally spiritual type person, but he claims to have reached enlightenment, and he kind of breaks down the whole experience and stuff from the beginning to the end. That book didn't help me as much as far as actual technique of meditation, but it helped me kind of get fired up about like what's capable, what the possibilities are. So yeah. If you're that kind of a person like I am, where you want to read ahead a little, look at sneak a peek in the back last chapter of the book, he kind of does that stuff. But,
what's that called again?
Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha, and the author is Daniel Ingram. Now you can get it for free too. It's a paid book if it's physical, but he has a digital version and has PDF and EPUB and all that stuff on his website. And I don't know what that is off the top of my head, but if you Google Mastering Core Teachings of the Buddha, it'll pop right up. And he offers that free version on his website as well. So I'm going to that's on my list to reread here next month. So, and then the last book that I would recommend, which is a book I read years ago, but I reread a couple of years ago, was How to Meditate by Lawrence Lashan. And it's another good, super simple, super small book that would be a great introduction to meditation. He had another super awesome analogy on there where he said, meditation is like walking a puppy, and you want the puppy is your mind, and you want the puppy to stay on the sidewalk, and it wants to go and sniff the tree and walk off the tree lawn and the people's yards and wander. And you don't yank the dog back on, you just gently nudge it back onto the path. And he's like, that's how meditation is. It's like you're not doing anything, violent or struggling. It's just like you prefer it to be here, and you just kind of nudge it in that direction. And I always thought that was a great, that and the cloud analogy from Headspace were two that really helped me kind of understand what was going on here better. So
awesome.
I don't know if I have anything else here. I think like most of my suggestions would be those websites and or that website, and then those books. And like you said, the ultimate thing that I would suggest is just to start meditating right now. Like you don't need to do anything fancy, or you don't need to read any of these books. Jeff and I already explained to you how to meditate. Sit down in a quiet place and upright so you don't fall asleep or pass out. And then just pay attention to the breath coming out of your nostrils, and just do that for count to 4 and start over. And once you're comfortable with that, you don't have to count anymore. Just pay attention to your breath, and you can learn from there. But the trick is to start doing this stuff, and then start doing and do it consistently. Try to do it every day. So try to get a 1 or 2 minute meditation in every single day, and just start with something really easy. Your goal to start with is not to have experiences, but just to establish the practice and to just get your mind and your body used to doing it every day. So the quicker you start, the better. And you'll be glad you did. I mean, within months, within weeks, maybe. So,
yeah. I mean, I felt like it only took just a matter of days, because just the simple act of taking some time out was relieving in and of itself. I mean, there's something about silence that's just, and being alone and quiet is just so refreshing when you start doing it. So I think it's kind of cool, because you just like what George says, you'll start seeing what it's like, and you'll get to experience it. If you haven't already, you don't need any of these books, and you don't need all this head knowledge about meditation. You just need to sit in silence and watch your thoughts. And another thing I recommend is keep a journal. So, after you meditate, write down how your experience went and what you thought, and keep a log of what happens, what comes up in your meditations. And when you write down some of the repetitive thoughts that kept coming up, it helps ground it, and it makes you not ruminate on it as much, because you kind of wrote it down. You put it out there. So that's it for my resources. And is that it for you, George?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one thing I wanted to reiterate from the beginning of the podcast was that that raptitude.com blog. I think anybody who gravitates towards this podcast, they would really enjoy his writing, and he has a really laid back approach to mindfulness that I've been really enjoying putting into practice lately. So that I'd give him his articles are just the right length to read, and might get you inspired to do more of this stuff.
Sounds awesome. Well, thanks, George. It's been a pleasure. Love talking meditation with you. And to all the listeners out there, you can follow me at Jeff_Finley on Twitter, and G Coghill for George on Twitter. And you can always hit up makermistaker.com for new articles and new podcast episodes. If you find us in iTunes, give us a rating. It helps other people find the podcast. And because we don't get paid for doing this stuff, the best thing you can do is share the podcast with somebody you think might like it. And so we really appreciate it. Thank you for sticking around for the 2 hours if you made it this far. We like to get real deep. We talk a lot. We get into it. We love this stuff. So we hope that we've inspired you to pick up the meditation habit, maybe deepen your meditation habit, get into it more. So if you have any questions, email me, jeff82finley@gmail.com. I'm also coaching meditation on coach.me, so look me up there. And that's it. And thanks for listening. And thanks, George. It was a good one.
Yep, I really enjoyed it, Jeff.
All right. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.